Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2023 Senior Project Presentations. Today, the 10 super accomplished, incredibly interesting COA students to my right here are going to tell us about the kind of work that they did for their senior projects. And after each presentation, you'll have a chance to ask a question or two. And after we're done with the whole show, our speakers will hang around for a little bit if you have any follow-up questions. But we can't wait to get started. My name is Kaya. I'm a second-year student here, and I'll be the MC today. Home for me is Southern Ontario, a town called Nogo-Jiwinong, which means the place at the end of the rapids. And the class of 2023 is also at the end of a set of rapids right now. Over the last year, these students have put their hearts, passions, and skills into their self-designed senior projects. They've made tough decisions, they've paddled hard, they've made plans, they've changed plans, they've paddled backwards to go forwards, and they've likely swamped their canoes at least once. Now's their chance to look back, feel proud, share their work, and hopefully sit down and rest on the rocks for a little while. It's important to acknowledge that we're gathered here on stolen land. Colonization aims not only to erase people, but also their languages, stories, knowledge, and ideas. This is the homeland of the Wabanaki people. As an educational institution, standing up for knowledge means standing up with the peoples resisting colonization. And with that, it's time to introduce our first speaker. Helen Portner came to Maine from Germany and has focused her time at COA on studying food systems and education. She's been especially interested in pathways to food sovereignty that center on health and justice for all relationships within the food system. After graduation, she'll move to New York's Hudson Valley to work on a small organic farm. Her project, Farming in Relationship, Imagining a Movement in Quilts, was directed by Drew Colbert. Let's get it started, Helen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kaya, for the intro. For my senior project, I mostly made this quilt that you can see over there. And I wanted my senior project to really be both a culmination of a lot of things I did at COA and also have space for something completely new. And so at COA, I mostly farmed and thought and read and talked about how our food system can become less corporate and more just for everyone involved. And on the other side, there's a lot of fiber arts in my family, and so I chose quilting as the medium to continue to think about change making in the food system. And the central piece of my senior project, the quilt, invites you all to dream and envision what a different relationship to the land and food could feel like and look like. And before I started to sew or even to draft, I did a lot of research on African American quilting in the US. And behind me on the left, you can see a quilt by Marilee Bendolf, and on the right, one by Faith Ringgold, two quilt makers that really inspire me. And I think the main idea that I got out of this research is that quilting and stitching especially is its own discourse, and it's not secondary to the written word. And that made me wonder, how the softness and all the tactile experience of a quilt can really add to how we understand a question or the world. And with food system in particular, like how can we envision a different food system better or just differently if it's not just written down? And in addition to that, I got stuck with this question of what it's like to be thinking through your hands. And I really like this parallel here between stitching a blanket with your hands and farming by hand and seeding and weeding and harvesting and doing all of those things by hand. And for the central piece of my senior project, I first embroidered all the green blocks that are framing the center. And then I put the shapes on the centerpiece, I put those together, and then I framed it with a lot of flower patterns that I had. And then that's the front, and then I worked on the back, which you can see up here. And initially, I didn't love how they went together because I thought their energies were too different. But then Drew, my project director, sort of reminded me that maybe they also just stand for different energies within one winter, because I made the front in the darkest part of winter and the back side when the sun was getting stronger and I was getting really excited about the vibrancy of spring. And that change of perspective made me like them, and so I put them together with the batting in the middle and hand quilted through the 3 layers. And for me, this piece really is a way to stop and think about what literal shapes a different relationship to food and the land could take. And throughout the sort of last 3 years at CUA, I really learned so much about different visions of a more just food system and like different pathways to a more reciprocal relationship to land. And I was able to translate a lot of that into fabric and into stitching here. But I think this quilt also has a lot of limitations, and the more I've been thinking about it, the more I want to make more of them and be more specific and, for example, expand on like whose relationship I'm talking about, how food has become a commodity and continues to become a commodity, and who has or hasn't organized really radically for a long time. And throughout this whole senior project, I intentionally made the choice to do it by myself, sort of in isolation, which was great, but after a while I did get a little lonely in my senior project space, and so I invited a bunch of CUA friends to come together, and together we made quilt blocks that spoke to what nourishes us in life. And there were people who were sewing experts and people who had never sewn or if not for a long time, and together we made this quilt that's behind us and that's also up here, which was a really wonderful process. And I think while creating both of these pieces in my senior project, I really tried to lean away from perfectionism. And I think quilting without a pattern has been a great way to lean into what is important to me in my sewing practice, which is really transporting a message or an emotion rather than focusing on getting all the seams to line up perfectly. And I've also tried to listen to the materials and figure out what they want to do and what they want to be, which is really hard for me, but I think it's a great exercise to be more, in the moment, respond more rather than sort of be stuck on my plan. And again, there's a parallel here between that and farming, where we always have to respond to the weather and to whoever else wants to eat our plants and all those things. And I think moving forward, I really want to continue to think through systems with textiles and figure out what it means for me to be thinking with my hands. I want to keep making quilts with other people, and within that also figure out a way in which maybe quilting can be sort of a facilitator and mediator of conversation. And this senior project really wouldn't have been possible without so many people, and I'm really grateful for many family members and friends who've been such great cheerleaders and critics along the way, and so many people who've really so generously shared with me their love for growing food and for art making and for organizing over the past couple years. And I thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, up here. So the question was, just to paraphrase it, about the theme of the quilt and how I had so many ideas and how I narrowed it down on food systems and farming. And I think it kind of started with food systems. That is has been my main focus at CUA and in farming. And I've been engaging with that a lot through writing papers and reading papers and having sort of academic discussions. And I wanted to think through my body, think through my hands, and see if there's other things that emerge out of, envisioning what it literally can feel like wrapping myself in that quilt has a very specific feeling to it that I can't really put words to, and I feel like that's kind of the point with it. And so I think this really, the centerpiece, the shapes in the middle really speak to more abstract concepts of sort of movement organizing and observation, and then the green blocks around it really speak to all the things that make me really excited about farming that are more, maybe, more simple. Yeah.
How did you decide on your colors, and the fabrics? Because a lot of clothing is where you get your fabrics, or where
Right.
you find them, predominantly warm, those colors.
Yeah.
Was it the fabrics that you got, and then that sort of directed you how to do it, or did you go searching for the colors?
The question was how I chose on the colors and what came first, the fabrics or the idea. And I think it's a mix of both. I think in my research, I was just looking at so many quilts and getting so much inspiration. And I think I just saw a bunch of quilts in one day or something that were all kind of pink and green. And I was like, wow, I really love pink and green together. And then I had a bunch of fabric from friends and from family members that I'd gotten. So I just kind of stuck with that. And now my fabric collection is also still mostly pink and green, so I don't know, I can't really get out of it anymore now. But I think it was a mix of both. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Our next speaker is Tanvi Kaushik. Tanvi transferred to COA almost 3 years ago after studying political science in Delhi, India. Over the last several years, she has been farming, swimming, scooping ice cream, beekeeping, and she's also been thinking about citizenship, climate change, and care work in both India and the US. Her senior project is a film focused on citizenship, gender, Indian nationalism, and Kashmir. After graduation, Tanvi will work at Beach Hill Farm and then join A Climate to Thrive as a community organizer. Welcome, Tanvi.
Thanks, Kaya. I'm Tanvi, and over the last 6 months, I've been working on a film titled Again, I Have Returned. So 3 years ago, in 2019, 2020, before I came to COA, I was studying political science in Delhi. And during that year, the Indian government passed the Citizenship Amendment Act, which promised to grant citizenship to non-Muslim migrants from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. And they also announced plans to implement the National Register of Citizens, which aimed at creating a register of all legal citizens in India to help facilitate in identifying and deporting illegal migrants. In December of 2019, protests against these moves began. So the protests started in northeast India, particularly in Assam, and very quickly spread to Delhi, which is where I was studying. In Shaheen Bagh, protesters occupied a major highway and set up a protest camp that was occupied for 24 hours a day for over 3 months. And the protest was led almost predominantly by elderly Muslim women. And it became much of where I spent that winter term. I began working with other students from my university to archive the protests under the title Azad India Collective, where Azad means free. And I arrived at COA that fall with the intention of studying food systems and climate justice through policy lens, but very soon I found that through taking different classes, particularly the arts and humanities, thinking across disciplines really allowed me to revisit and reconsider the questions that were coming up for me in the work that I had been doing while in Delhi. In the fall of 2021, my final project across 2 classes became a film in which I was thinking through the material that we were engaging with in both classes, that was both text and film. The film was concerned with sexual difference, particularly thinking about the category of woman in the context of student-led political protest in India and movement across different kinds of borders, geographical, corporeal, and linguistic. My senior project has been my attempt to rework and continue this work of translation between text and film, sound and picture, and across borders and languages. It has culminated in the production of a short film in 2 parts, a diptych, made primarily with found footage, with also some of my own footage from 3 years ago that I began to treat as found footage. This process has entailed developing a practice of video editing that has encompassed making a lot of choices around opacity and splicing and volume and color. And I would love to show you just a couple of clips from the film.
कन्हैया के नाम से एक छात्र, उनके शब्द हमें जलते हैं, आज़ादी के झंडे के नीचे हमें बसाता है। मेरे जो शक थे सब बहलीन हो गए, अब मैं इन्हीं शब्दों की कैदी हूँ।
शादी करने की तो ना करने की तो हाँ करने की
जोशत हमें दो मुल्क के बीच फंसाया,
सुनसान सड़क पे
अपनाया और पराया कर दिया।
अरे बस में मांगू मेट्रो में मांगू हम लेके रहेंगे
बर्दाश्त
तो
इतनी नाजुक
मनुवाद से तो शोषण से भी तो जुल्मों से भी तो गरीबी से तो भुखमरी से है हक हमारी है जान से प्यारी है प्यारी प्यारी
Dear Shahid, I am writing to you from your far-off country. Far even from us who live here. Where you no longer are. Everyone carries his address in his pocket so that at least his body will reach home. Rumors break away on their way to us in this city. But word still reaches us from border towns. Men are forced to stand bare feet in snow waters all night. The women are alone inside. Soldiers smash radios and television. With bare hands, they tear our houses to pieces.
From there, the film goes on to investigate street theater and protests, movement between the masculine and feminine, individual and group, public and private, in the context of the Indian occupation of Kashmir, India's new citizenship laws, the theater and death of Safdar Hashmi, the poetry of Agha Shahid Ali, and the Shaheen Bagh protests. It focuses on the site of the university and the invocation of Azadi, meaning freedom, chanted in the context of various political projects in South Asia. This investigation began for me while studying in Delhi, and at COA, making this film has been a mode through which to continue to think. This film is very much a work in progress, and I hope to continue to work on it over the coming years. It's been a result of many, many, many hours of screenings and conversation and feedback, and really an enormous vault of support from a whole number of people. Thank you to all of you. So I can take any questions if anyone has any. Ron.
Your immediate work on the farm and the Climate Tribe seems to take you away from this passion. How do you plan to bring that back together?
Yeah, I think this has been a question for me in the last few weeks, especially. I think in one way, I wouldn't have made this film at all had I not come to COA and had I continued to study in Delhi, and it was really only possible through what I encountered here. But I think it's also at a stopping point in terms of what I can do, like working with found footage and where it's at. And I think it needs to rest a little bit, sort of in my mind. And yeah, climate work also feels super urgent and super necessary, and that also doesn't feel like it's separate from this. They feel very much intertwined, and yeah, I think returning to this at some point feels like, something I will do at some point, but yeah, this has been really a mode that I've been thinking through, like making this film. Yeah, and I don't think that that'll stop. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Just even the short clip you showed us is so beautiful and incredibly haunting. I wonder if you can talk about the audience you could imagine as you continue the work, and whether you can bring it to your home country and have that shared experience, and whether that's a goal that you have.
Yeah, I think so. The question was about the audience and sort of my intended audience and who I might eventually bring this to, including back home. Yeah, I think again that remains to be a question, and sort of because the process has been not about creating a product that I show and that delivers a particular message or makes particular claims, but has been for me to work out questions that I've had. I haven't yet really had a focused attention on who my audience will be. While saying that, in the last few weeks, I've really been thinking about, I'm gonna show this here, I'm gonna have to think about what kinds of specificities are legible. And I would, love to show it back home too, but I think that makes me a little bit more nervous and definitely feels like far off in the future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tanvi. Next up, we've got Lisa Marie Kotoff. Lisa is at home in Germany, where she was raised, as well as in Maine and in Mexico, where she's been living and learning for the last 4 years. With her project Fishing for Credits, she was able to translate her interests in economics and fishing into a case study of a Mexican fishing co-op. Lisa will spend the summer working at Springtide Seaweed right here in Frenchman Bay before returning to Mexico for the winter. Come on up, Lisa.
Thank you, Kaya. My project, Fishing for Credits, is the result of 2 months of fieldwork in Rio Lagatos, Mexico, where I was working with a fishing cooperative. Rio Lagatos is a small community of about 3,500 people located on the northeastern shore of the state of Yucatan in Mexico. That's right up there. Most people there live from traditional fishing and some touristic activities. And I first came to Rio Lagatos in early 2022 during the Yucatan program. During this first visit, I spent a month living with a local family, and I immersed myself into the community. Driven by an interest in cooperative economics and common resource management, I quickly started to speak with a lot of fishermen, like my host father, Jose, who's on the right here. During this time, I learned a lot about the community, about its mannerisms, and the who is who of the town. The idea for my senior project was born out of this first experience. I was excited to go back and learn more, and so I returned for another month of immersion in fieldwork. And this time, I was able to speak with even more people, and even some of Mexico's co-op experts. I also attended a week-long workshop together with the fishermen, and this was a really transformational part of my research experience. Because during the workshop, I was able to build friendships with some of the fishermen pictured here, and after the workshop, most people knew my name, and I knew theirs too, which proved incredibly helpful for my interviews later. Coming out of the fieldwork and the many, many interviews, I found that, surprisingly, the most interesting common resource managed by this co-op, at least to me, was not even fish, but the different collective benefits of co-op membership. Collective benefits included things like health insurance, fishing licenses for certain species, political representation on different levels, and access to loans. Finally, I decided to focus on the last aspect, access to loans. And that is because access to capital is vital to any fisherman. Their livelihood depends on being able to acquire and maintain their boat and fishing gear. And many of the fishermen in Rio Lagatos do not have access to other crediting institutions, so the co-op created their own system to provide loans. I quickly realized that access to loans, much like the fishery itself, could be treated like a common pool resource, which is why I used Elinor Ostrom's design principles for common resource management as a framework for my analysis. Ostrom's first principle is that commons need to have clearly defined boundaries, especially with regard to the pool of users. In the case of the credit system, the pool of users is defined by co-op membership, so all the 180 members of the cooperative have access to the loans. This is why the system of admissions is so important, because only if you have trustworthy members with a credible commitment, you can have a functioning credit system. And in order to ensure that all new members are trustworthy and have credible commitment, the co-op has a system of admission that involves several stages. In the first stage of the process, the prospective member has to introduce themselves to the General Assembly of all members, where a majority vote decides if they will be admitted into the co-op. In the interviews, I was told that people from away had close to no chance to pass this stage, as they were deemed untrustworthy from the beginning. If you live in Maine, you know what that's about. This part of the process certainly leads to a high homogeneity across the members, which is actually considered effective for success in the co-op. Those who pass the vote are put on a one-year probation where they have all the obligations of a member, but none of the rights, including the right to credit. In that year, the prospective member's productivity is tested. And productivity is so important because only fishermen that go fishing often and successfully have a chance to make enough profits to pay back loans in the future. One element that carries across the first two stages is the Padrino system, which brings me right to Ostrom's second principle. The second design principle is that rules should fit local circumstances. And with the Padrino system, this means that every prospective member has to find a current member to vouch for them as a metaphorical godparent. The Padrino system ensures accountability and increased connectivity between the members, and is born out of the cultural context. Padrinos, or godparents, play an important role in Mexican society and are often a large part of a child's upbringing. So translating this strong and culturally embedded term into the credit system presents an excellent example of local circumstances fitting rules. I hope that this short run-through showed how the admission system helps to ensure a well-functioning credit system, because through the different stages, a level of homogeneity and trust is established, as well as the expectation for productivity and credible commitment. After all, my project is the result of asking many questions, in Spanish and in English, to myself, to the fishermen of Rio Lagatos, and to my project director and friends. So I have to thank everyone who's been giving me answers, and it's my turn to take questions now. Yes.
I was just, thank you, super interesting, and I was curious. I don't think I saw any women in the cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
And your research, I was curious, one, just how you sort of thought about that, and if there is a role in the future, perhaps, for women in this cooperative.
Yeah, the question was about women in the cooperative, and that's a really interesting point. So all of the 180 members are male. So far, it's a very gendered job, and as I said earlier, like there's this system of admissions that really does lead to high homogeneity, and I think that also encompasses gender. But it's really interesting for me because being at this co-op and seeing how it works, they have these two secretaries that do kind of all the paperwork, and they really are the cornerstone of the whole management of the co-op. So in a way, there's no female members, which is very sad, and I really hope it will change in the future. But the co-op itself really is functioning because of these two women. Yeah. Yes.
Piggybacking on that question, are you, in your research, are you familiar with an organization called FINCA? And FINCA is a global microfinance organization. All of their village banking is women because they find that men are not liable. So it's interesting actually to see, this is a form of a village bank, to see that actually the men make it work. I don't know if that's something that
Yeah.
you could talk to.
So the question was about, microfinancing and gender, and there's a lot of studies that found that women are actually better recipients of microfinancing and microcredits because they seem to be more reliable in paying back their loans. And you were commenting on the fact that this is all men making this credit system work. I think part of why that is because there is no women in the co-op. I think it would work just as well if there were, maybe better. But yes, I agree with you. There's a lot of research on microfinancing that says that women are, on average, more reliable in paying back these loans. Yeah.
Nice work, Lisa. Next up, we have John Robbins. John enjoys stickers and working with data in meticulous detail. John's senior project is a personal mural installed in the South Hall of the Davis Center for Human Ecology. The project was directed by Sophie Tuttle, the artist whose large-scale whale mural can be seen on the north side of the Blum Gallery here. After COA, John plans to pursue a career in data science. Come on up, John.
Thank you, Kaya. Hi, everyone. My name is John Robbins, and today I am presenting the project I created and installed on the first floor of Che. It's the first permanent student installation in the brand new building. I call this mural my mural. Behind me is a drawing made with markers on a large piece of paper. This is the origin of the mural. The original drawing was 24 inches tall and 18 inches wide, and the finished mural is roughly 8 feet tall and 19 feet wide. It might be useful for you to know that I have psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, or PNES. Psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, unlike some seizures, are brought on by trauma. Psychogenic seizures typically occur when the body feels comfortable enough to express distress from previous or recurring trauma. The drawing behind me is based on what I see during seizures when my eyes are closed. The shapes move and morph and stick during my episodes, but the big difference between this version and the reality is the shapes I actually see are always green. Last summer, I began having episodes, or seizures, for hours at a time, every day, multiple times a day. This included repetitive jerking movements, falls, temporary paralyzation, the inability to speak, and other symptoms. I routinely went to the hospital and nothing seemed to help. I couldn't work my summer job for buildings and grounds, and other non-related health issues flared up. I wasn't able to walk, cook, or take care of myself. After returning to my family and enduring an annoying amount of medical testing, I didn't want to talk about it anymore. I felt like my body was beyond my control, and the only thing I wanted to do was draw alone. During this time, I spoke with a handful of different people, both academic and familial. Those that knew me were scared for me, and the message was pretty clear. School was not a good idea. I was scared too, but I was hesitant to quit. I had a nice chat with Courtney Collum, my academic advisor, but after an hour and a half of talking it over, she said, "You're not going to listen to me, are you?" And she was right. I didn't want to give up without trying first. I knew people worried about my health, but I was the one having a hard time, and I knew I was supposed to be here. I processed the world through art, and I relied on that to help me figure out my next steps. Soon I had determined I wanted to share some of this process as my senior project. I began to conceive of the mural. I had never attempted to work like this, and it made me question my knowledge of painting. As Kaya mentioned in my introduction, my project director was the wonderful muralist Sophie Tuttle. I would encounter problems and then brainstorm solutions before asking Sophie for advice. A lot of the time, my instincts turned out to be right, and Sophie would simply encourage me to keep at it. An early choice I made was to put a layer of white under each of the blobs before painting them their final colors. This allowed the colors to pop against the gray background. I learned a wall is an incredibly inflexible surface to paint on. To effectively access the areas I wanted to cover, I tried everything from laying on the floor under the water fountain to holding onto a pipe above the big green monster, which is the biggest green blob right over there. The painter's tape, which I used as a visual aid and lovingly spent days putting up, ended up ripping paint not only off my mural, but also off the original gray. It took some time to repair the damages. Lesson learned. I think one of the most valuable things I learned from this project is that my artwork and my experience deserves to be acknowledged. I am proud of what I've made, and I hope that by integrating a portion of my own story into the fabric of this place, it helps bring greater attention to the experiences and stories of other COA students with disabilities. I am not the only one. So here's the finished mural, or about as much of it as you can fit in one photo. And if you want to see the full thing, I would highly recommend walking up over there and going to Che to see it for yourself. And so this is a lot of people that I want to thank. And I also want to thank everyone who came and listened to me. I'm happy to take questions. Yes.
John, can you talk a little bit about the governance process at the college and what you had to go through to get permission?
Yes, that's a really good point. So Darren asked about the governance process of me getting the mural approved to be put on this wall in Che. So I met with Reagan Greer, who is in charge of the buildings on COA and is really in charge of like what's going on in each of them. And then I met with her. I made all these sketches. I measured the wall. I told her what I wanted to do. I measured everything that I had to work around, and I gave her sketches and visuals. And then after her approval, I went to Campus Building and Planning Committee. I went to one of their meetings and showed them the visuals that I had drawn and measured and told them why I wanted to do the mural and what it was about and all of those things, and it was unanimously approved. And then I went to ACM, where it was announced by Reagan. And that was also approved through ACM as well. So that was the process to get that fully approved by the community. Yes. Thank you. So the question is about like a plaque or a sign to go along with the mural. So originally, someone suggested I do a plaque, and I really moved away from the idea of a plaque because it felt very away from the mural, and it didn't feel like it would be cohesive at all. After all of this was put together, I bought a picture frame on Walmart.com and painted it the same color as the light blue in the mural and hung it up on the wall by it, and it says, "This is what my seizures look like," in the same Crayola marker that the original drawing was made. And then it says John Robbins 23. But it is also not like an obvious sign. It says it backwards. Because why not? It was a great idea from Dave Feldman, so I'm going to take that. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Our next speaker is Maddie Stevens. Maddie is a magician. Not in the usual sense with the bunnies and the top hats, but through the magical act of stop motion animation, bringing still characters to life. During the fall term, she expanded her knowledge of the craft by pursuing a residency that she will discuss in her presentation. With her project director, Nancy Andrews, Maddie created a 5-minute stop motion film. Take it away, Maddie.
Good morning. Hi. My senior project is a 5-minute stop-motion short that follows Franklin, a lovable pig in a sweater vest who can't stop looking at his phone. When the unimaginable happens, he uncovers connections with old hobbies and new friends. I will now show you the opening scene and walk you through the process of how it came to be. Although I'd been familiar with the art of stop-motion animation before coming to COA, I hadn't imagined it would be the medium I would choose for my senior project. During my first year at COA as an environmental activist, I envisioned a project that involved research about an environmental cause or the start of a not-for-profit organization. I slowly came to the realization that I wasn't happy with what I was doing. I began to look more inward and found myself restoring my passion for art. I enjoyed graphic design and illustration, but it wasn't until Nancy Andrews' animation courses where I felt like everything stuck. Moving a puppet frame by frame under fluorescent lights is a technique that requires both attention to the present moment and futuristic thinking. During Nancy's courses, I was also introduced to many stop-motion animators. I had become heavily inspired by Swedish animator Anna Montzaris and her short film, Enough. I loved her use of storytelling and her felted puppet character designs. I fell in love with the art form ever more so. Taking a hold of this medium, I ran with it, or more so, I sat with it on a train headed west. I knew by then that a stop-motion short film was what I wanted to create for my senior project, but I felt I needed to learn more. So this past fall, with the support of COA's expeditionary funds, I got a chance to meet with over a dozen animators from across the US. I was able to talk with each artist and visit the studios they worked at and the schools they taught at. When relying on merely public transportation, I, just like Franklin, became reliant on my phone for directions. I was suddenly aware of the little attention that I was giving to my surroundings. I came back with a sense of what life may be like pursuing the craft of stop-motion animation in the real world and the storyline for my upcoming senior project. I began the process for my film during the winter term with a long to-do list that included the following: drawing up a storyboard, creating an animatic, designing sets, puppets, and props, building sets, puppets, and props, and filming everything. The storyboard helped me plan out what the film would look like, while the animated version, the animatic, gave me an idea about the timing and layout of my film. I learned a great deal from the artists I met in the past and my professor, Nancy Andrews, but hands-on learning can never compete. The complexity of my puppet design resulted in a long, frustrating process. Every puppet was created by hand with a base of aluminum wire, which was prone to breakage. To prevent this, I made each limb on every puppet replaceable through a method of fitting square copper tubing together. If you thought stop-motion animation was stressful, the idea of a limb breaking mid-scene was even more so. The filming was simpler than expected. I used a multitude of handcrafted camera rigs. To achieve a panning shot, I put my tripod in a rolling trash can. Moving a millimeter frame by frame is therapeutic to me. I gained a presence I worried I wasn't able to feel animating on such a large scale. After filming wrapped, the only task left was editing, which took place during this past term. To my surprise, it took 5 weeks to finish the puppets, 1 week to build the sets and props, 4 weeks to film, and 6 weeks to edit. I will continue to submit my film to film festivals worldwide and look forward to seeing where it will take me next. If you would like to see a screening of the film, as well as Franklin and his cast of friends, you can head upstairs to the Blum Gallery until about Saturday, tomorrow afternoon, wow. And you can also hopefully get yourself a free pin if they're not all gone. And I would just like to thank everyone who has helped me in this project, and thank you all for coming out today. Thank you. I can take any questions. Yes. Yeah, the question was how I see taking my artwork forward from here. And yeah, that's definitely a question I have myself, of course. But meeting up with all the different animators when traveling, I learned I don't really want to do independent animation. It was okay, but it definitely just seemed a little lonely. But I met up with this great studio in LA, and it was just like this whole cast of these great people working on animation together, and it definitely seems like that's what I want to do, something that's as creative and as hands-on, that maybe not working in such a large studio where you don't really get the element of stop-motion animation that you would get working by yourself. Yeah. Thank you. Anything else? Yeah.
Why Franklin? How did you come up with that name? He's a beautiful fellow.
Yeah, that was definitely like I spent at least a couple weeks on that. I was trying to get people to vote. I had a whole list. The question was about the name for Franklin. And I do believe it means something about freedom and I guess, and independence and finding something about your passion. I think it's along those lines. I tried to look up names that meant the character. And I didn't really like the name Franklin at first, and now it's stuck, and I really enjoy it. So, thank you.
Thanks, Maddie. Nisani Walser is a native Brooklynite. She began her studies at COA with a focus in environmental law and policy, then later combined that work with a focus in communication and travel tour journalism. Her final project speaks to the ecologies and histories of a people and place. She plans to continue this project after graduation, exploring multimedia work and continuing to document the stories of people around the world. Welcome, Nisani.
Hi everyone, how's everybody doing? It's good. My name is Nisani Walser, and these past 10 weeks afforded me the opportunity to more deeply explore a country that I call my second home. This country is Belize, the least densely populated Central American state, but also one of the most diverse. I'd like to take you to the capital of Belmopan, where an amalgam of cultures call this place home, including Mestizo, Creole, and Mennonite, but my specific project focus is on the Garifuna people, an Afro-Indigenous group from Belize, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, St. Vincent, and also my family lineage. Belize is where my grandfather, Furman Harry, he's coming in a few hours, I'm so excited, where my grandfather, Furman Harry, lives. He shares love for coconuts, food from the land, laughter, and time with a big family that's always making history. I wanted to somehow capture that history and those family stories, so after these visits and conversations with family members, I started to create a book. I center on my grandfather's role in our family's cultural ties as Garifuna and Garifuna American people. Through history and memory spanning generations, I explore how Garifuna culture has evolved and been preserved, and how that history has made my family who they are and what our legacies mean as a collective. I want to first take you back to my grandpa's garden when I was 7 years old. Here's an excerpt from my chapter called Obun Amurunu, which means I for you, you for me in Garifuna. This is one of my favorite spaces. There are plants with shades of purple, red, and orange, some roses, and a coconut tree he's climbed up with a ladder. From the burrows of the tree's thick leaves, he drops a coconut down with a thud. After he gets down, he cuts swiftly. Chop, 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 goes the sound of my grandpa's machete against the hard green shell. He chops to make a small hole for drinking the water and offers the coconut to me, but I politely refuse. He drinks all the water, chops the coconut open, and uses a green shard piece as a spoon to eat the white meat inside of the shell. Almost gel-like, the meat gives easily to his spoon as he eats and smiles, and I watch in amusement. While Belize is one geographical location of my familial culture, our origins go back even further in the same chapter. Yurume, a Garifuna word for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. These origins are part of a greater story of myself and my family. Yurume is the homeland of where our culture started, the homeland of the Garifuna people, the birth of a powerful and unique culture. An intermixture of West Africans, the native Arawak, Lokono, and Carib Kalinago Indians are who we are. The Garifuna were indigenous to the land when a genocide was attempted by the British in 1797. My ancestors boated to safety to Central America, the countries currently known as Nicaragua, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, a region where we have continued cultivating our indigenous roots. Those are the regions with the blue arrows. Garifuna people come from an exceptionally rich culture that doesn't have many histories written on it. And as far as I know, none have been written by Garifuna youth. So I wanted to change that. I returned to Belize to find out, how does the Garifuna legacy live in me and in those that I know best? And so I took a trip to Belize in spring break, where I navigated many different origin stories and perspectives from museum staff, as well as Garifuna elders. And with learning more about our origins, I also learned a lot about my grandpa on that trip too, especially how he had strived for a better life in America. My grandpa was the father of 10 children, and unfortunately, never able to follow his own dreams. He chose instead to focus all his attention on providing for his family. The details of his sacrifice have stayed with me, reminding me of all he did to make my current life possible. I've also thought a lot during this process about what this culture means to me and how it shifted from generation to generation and things that we've kept the same. And I included in my text a memory of my mother making a Belizean dish called panadas. These are panadas. They're like little fried Belizean snacks made with white fish, Belizean empanadas. Try these when you can. They're awesome. They're so good. In the final section of the book, I start to focus on my cousins investigating the Garifuna traits we carry as 21st century New Yorkers and Garifuna Americans, but also as African Americans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Belizeans, Hondurans, etc., etc. There's a lot of layers in my family. My family's really big, guys, so that's fine. This is my cousin Isaiah hugging his dear Aunt Lucy in Belize. And my cousin Mia, of a different generation, meeting her grandpa for the first time. To this day, she wants to return to Belize and Honduras. These are all people of inspiration for my chapters. This book remains a huge, and I'm gonna say it again, huge work in progress, and will develop as I continue to learn more, grow, and change. I'm committed to continuing this research and work of piecing together the legacy of my family as one example of the long, personal histories of the Garinagu people. That's Garifuna plural. We are a small but mighty culture with a lot to share with the world. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Yeah.
I've been lucky to spend a fair amount of time in Hopkins. And
Oh my gosh.
I love the Garifuna people.
Yes.
In your experience, what percentage of the people in Dangrigi and Hopkins are speaking Garifuna still primarily versus Creole? How's the language doing, I guess?
Yeah.
Is what I'm wondering.
That's a really good question. That also excites me too. So thank you for mentioning that. So I don't know exact like percentages of like people that are speaking the language, but I do know the status of the language. And in 2001, Garifuna was labeled, UNESCO of intangible, like important cultural heritage. The culture, the dance, the food. But since then, around that same time that it was labeled, from what I know, that was the same time that news came out that it was an endangered language and that not many people in our generation speak Garifuna. Personally, from my own experience, I don't know anybody else in my family that's like, it was beyond their control. Like we grew up monolingual, unfortunately, that speak Garifuna, except for really me, because I'm just now learning the language. I've always been so interested in it. This is an Arawakan language, and it has so many other influences from the people that tried to colonize. And so I've always been passionate about it. It's something that I want to return to, but it is dwindling. I know that for sure, and it is endangered. And so I think that's what this whole project for me was about, just like returning to something that I'm really passionate about, that I don't want to lose, and like figuring out how my family is still returning back to those origins despite, a huge part of them not having the language, and just getting back to our roots. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yeah, Gabby. Yeah. So I'm gonna, if that's okay, I'll go back. So my grandpa shared this photo with me when he was in Belize on his experiences, just like, mopping the floors. He said 71 Pine Street was where he worked in Manhattan for a really long time to provide for his family. A really huge, crux of the story for me, or a really huge part of it, was the fact, the sacrifice that my grandpa, went through, and what he actively chose and wanted to do. Like, he didn't just make this decision to, because he wasn't happy. He was happy. He was at peace, with the decision that he made, because he saw, what his future children could be and what his future grandchildren could be before he even knew us. And so when I saw that photo, I got really emotional because I was like, wow, this was what this man did for so many years. He was happy about it, and he did it for me before he even knew me. And that's why I labeled this whole project because of my grandpa. It was because of him that I'm here right now. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your presentation, Nisani. Mauro Jose Ramirez Asofeifa was born and raised in Palmichal, Costa Rica. His academic focuses are sustainable business, entrepreneurship, and education. He has worked with children and youth in communities located in Armenia, Brazil, Costa Rica, and the United States. Mauro considers himself a social entrepreneur. For his senior project, Mauro wrote a project proposal for a community-based reforestation program and took the hatchery class to further develop his organization, Visionarios de Paz. Come on up, Mauro.
Thank you, Kaya. So, good morning, everybody. My name is Mauro Ramirez. I'm the co-founder of Visionarios de Paz, or Visionaries of Peace, which is a non-profit organization located in Costa Rica that provides experiential and environmental education for youth and their families. So today, I'm going to take you all on a journey to my hometown, Palmichal. Before I do so, imagine growing up surrounded by birds, such as butterflies, hummingbirds, toucans, rivers, and gorgeous cloud forest where you can hike around. That's how I grew up. And today, I want to welcome you to my grandparents' house, where local and international tourists came to learn about rural community-based tourism, sustainable practices, and the campesino life. From an early age, my family has been very involved in my community, from my grandparents welcoming tourists in their hometown to my parents looking for ways to improve the quality of life of community members. Caring for each other in my community is a core value for my family that I hold to this day. I have always dreamed about seeing my hometown develop sustainably with local, national, and international economic support and empowerment. I had the opportunity to study in Armenia, Brazil, and now the States. When COVID-19 hit, I returned home and realized how lucky I was about all the opportunities I had and wish others could live something similar. After having conversations with community members and leaders, we identified that there was a need of environmental education because our region suffers from environmental issues due to a monoculture coffee economy, which causes poverty, deforestation, and other unsustainable practices. As you all know, this threatens the natural cycles of biodiversity and water. We have been gaining traction, and until today, we have raised $25,000. We have built one greenhouse, hosted more than 20 experiential learning activities, educated 30 youth, and planted over 200 trees around Costa Rica. Youth are already changing paradigms. For example, Samir is 9 years old and struggled in his first year of elementary school to learn how to read and write. After he began attending activities with our organization, he improved academically and also started to advocate as a steward in our little town. His mom said he will tell on his uncle for hunting birds. This is how change begins. For my senior project, I joined the hatchery to professionalize and grow the organization. In the winter term, I drafted a community-based reforestation project with community output. As part of our hatchery, I tested the feasibility of the project. And this past May 14th, we hosted 23 community members who planted our first 50 trees. This is a pilot program for our 9.6-acre reforestation project, where we hope to plant 3,900 trees. Visionarios de Paz is a lifetime project, and I look forward to keep working to impact the future change makers of our community and continue the legacy that my grandparents and my parents who are here began. Next Sunday, June 11th, we are celebrating our 2nd anniversary. and we want to continue using the greenhouse to get more youth and families involved in the project. We currently have 2 international volunteers, so we look forward to keep working with them on tasks in the greenhouse, education, social media, and repurposing a band, which is a project coming now soon. Rocio has been with us since our first activity, and she is part of the board of directors. She and her husband used to run a small coffee business, but her husband passed away a few months ago. However, Rocio has been supported by our group, which has encouraged her to keep working on their small business. She has faced a hard time, but didn't give up. People like Rocio inspire us to keep doing this work. I want to thank family, friends, Papi, Mami, Visionarios de Paz Board of Directors, community members, Kerry, Jay, Gray, Blake, Kaylee, and writing tutors, especially Ale, for all the support until today. Without you all, I would not have been able to stand here. If you think you can provide guidance and further support for Visionarios de Paz to implement experiential and environmental education among youth and their families, and ensure the protection of biodiversity and water resources for the present and future generations of Costa Rica, I welcome you to contact us. Please feel free to scan the QR code right now to learn more about our coming project and also make this dream come true. Thank you again, and I'm more than happy to take questions. Please.
This is a wonderfully huge, ambitious project. What gives you the hope and the inspiration to continue? Because it's so big.
Sure, thank you so much. So the question was, what gives me hope and kind of eagerness to continue this project? As I said, I dreamt since I was a kid about having all these opportunities. I did not imagine really having all of them, and not being here, being able to ensure that I can also provide similar opportunities for others. That's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm really looking forward to other youth in my hometown can also have the similar opportunities I have. So because my life has changed because of all this education, and as I said earlier, I had a different opportunity with my family growing up. I also want them to have something similar, so we can really change my community and have it more like sustainable and equitable for everybody. Thank you, Ron. Other questions? Sure.
How will you use the bus?
The bus, oh yeah. So there is a GoFundMe that we are right now running. This the QR code is for. And this bus is for our office. So we hope to host people coming, but especially it's mainly for the volunteers. So we just have 2 international volunteers who join us. They are from Germany. And they, as part of the project, they are required to have like a space. So they work 40 hours a week for us, so they volunteer their time. And it's kind of to have a kitchen, and then like more moving forward, like a solar panel. But it's kind of for us to be there working next to the greenhouse. So that's the main purpose of our band. And that's how it's going to look like once we fundraise the money, and they're already working on the band. So yeah, that's all, our short project. Sure. I'm more than happy to chat later with anybody, please.
Thank you, Mauro. The first song Isabel Grimm ever made was called The Lightning Struck Tower and included a dramatic reading of Dumbledore's death from Harry Potter. Isabel is an audio-visual artist from upstate New York. Born in the information age, Isabel explores the relationship between linear time and exponential technological growth through their work. Their interests in techno-futurism and the cyber network are further explored through their music, which takes inspiration from synth pop, techno sound art, and alternative music. Come on up, Izzy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Kaya.
I'm Isabel. I am a video and performance artist, and my senior project is called In Connection with the Domains of Abstract Science. The full project, which runs at about 35 minutes, is made up of 5 sound pieces with accompanying visuals. Like many people born in the digital age, my virtual presence began before I could really understand my physical one. And I think that kind of fucked me up. So in some ways, this project is really a reclamation of my digital self, one without the pressures and standards of others, and one that I've really let explore the many versions of me. So all of this was started almost a year ago while I was food systems coordinator on Mount Desert Rock. That's me food systems coordinating. And so between food inventory and whale inventory, I started really messing around on GarageBand with synthesizers, beats, harmonies, and just kind of experimenting with sounds. Anyways, I've never considered myself to be a musician before this. What I really am is a digital cinematographer. And as a videographer, I'm more than confident in my style. And while film has a very distinct and very defined physicality to it, digital motion picture has an almost metaphysical quality to it if you're not careful. I love to play with how this can both hinder and help my expression. How does digital medium push back? In my work, I play a lot with self-identity and self-recognition. So when I found those patterns in the music I was making, it felt almost natural to put the two together. Because as a musician, I'm playing with these digitalizations and deconstructions of the self. So when I record myself and I convert my voice or image to zeros and ones, and I imprint them on an SD card, upload them to my laptop, edit them in a third-party software, I'm employing a global trade of information and ingenuity. In the same way, I'm constantly uploading other people's work into my mind. Patterns that I like, beats that inspire me. And so the people on this slide are some of the many whose work I have decoded, referenced, and replicated in my own work, such as Sadie Plant, Janelle Monáe, or Laurie Anderson. So I'm gonna play you guys just a little piece of what I've accomplished over the last year.
Starlight.
there's a lot of people who made this project possible with their support to me. Mostly I want to give my most of gratitude to Nancy Andrews, without who none of this would have happened. So I'll take any questions. Yeah.
You said you were trying to reconcile your digital self and your physical self.
Yes.
What did you learn through this process about that reconciliation, or is that search still continuing?
Yeah, so the question is, what did I learn about myself throughout the reconciliation, or how did I reconcile my digital self with my physical self? And I mean, it's a really complicated relationship especially when you grow up with such a prominent digital self. And so I think a lot of what happened here is I suddenly had this freedom to do, to be weird and to not follow trends and to just kind of do experimentation. And I mean, the full video, it's pretty, how do I say, I don't know. It's a really vulnerable thing, and it's not always easy to share it with people, because it was so made for me and so made for my relationship with the self that I'm not sure if it always translates. Yeah.
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
What's the significance of the line, "It's an eclipse"?
I think that has to do with the really addictive nature of social media and technology, and I think that a lot of times, even from day to day, but also in a bigger picture, that constant consumption of media kind of eclipses the real life. So it's kind of about how something so small, something so almost metaphysical, can actually really eclipse your day-to-day experience, and it becomes so much bigger than just where you are in your present moment. So, thank you.
Nice work, Izzy. Adrian Line grew up in Portland, Oregon, and on Swans Island, Maine. They have spent their time at COA studying creative writing, outdoor leadership, and human development. Their senior project, supervised by Catherine Turk and Nick Janae, is a culmination of these subjects and focuses mainly on canoeing and creative writing. This summer, they plan to be a canoe bum and continue the writing that was sparked by this project. Take it away, Adrian.
Thank you, Kaya. Hi, everybody. I have thrived in the outdoors of Maine since my start at COA. Going on outdoor orientation trips and working in the outing club helped spur my interest in paddling, which I have grown to love. But when I bought a canoe for my birthday last year, I took things up a notch. With more ability to explore on my own schedule, I only had to rely on myself to make trips happen. And I sure made them happen. I began squeezing in day paddles between classes and meetings with enough time to show up only a few minutes late. It was pretty awesome. As my fourth year approached, I wanted my senior project to incorporate canoeing, but it still needed some academic edge. I decided to explore Maine and myself through the outdoors and the written word, another aspect of my learning at COA that has helped develop my sense of self. I began going alone on multi-day outings in the fall of 2022. While away, I would journal about my thoughts and experiences on and off the water. When I returned, I wrote a narrative detailing each trip in its entirety. Every adventure highlighted momentous periods of my life in different ways. They helped tell stories about a changing relationship, developing my sense of home, experiencing vast wilderness, and understanding my limits. I'll share some juicy bits. That first trip in the fall pushed me a lot. It was my first solo overnight while canoe camping, and it came on the heels of a breakup. I planned to paddle for 4 days in the Debskeneg Lakes, but 4 became 2 once I was out there. As beautiful as it was, I got lonely once night settled in, and I just wanted to be with my friends. When I woke up the next day, the weather had turned for the worse, with wind and whitecaps. That pushed me over the edge. I didn't need to prove anything to myself just then, and decided to go back to MDI. That would be no easy task, though, having to paddle 6 miles in the worst conditions I had ever experienced, all alone. But don't worry, as you can see, I made it back in one piece. And the pictures don't do the storm justice. I only stopped to take photos once things had calmed down and felt more safe. After my adventure in the fall, I went home to Portland, Oregon. But the word home was loaded. Oregon didn't feel as much of a home as Maine did. I appreciated spending time with my family and old friends, though. It was good to see them all again. While I didn't canoe during winter break, I found myself on a different kind of adventure, fuel for more writing. This was a story about fun with friends in the Willamette National Forest and an analysis of my relationship with bicoastal living, with two conflicting ideas of where I belong. But by the time winter break came to a close, I was ready to go back home again, back to Maine. One of my last trips came during spring break with Ken Klein and his Human Ecology of Wilderness class. We traveled 1,000 miles south to Georgia and Florida to experience wilderness areas in person, having discussed the topic all winter long. Arriving to weather in the 80s while snow still blanketed the ground in Maine was incredible, but more incredibly, I got to canoe while northern lakes were still frozen. We paddled from the Okefenokee Swamp down the Suwannee River, two places unlike anything I've experienced elsewhere. And later, camping on Cumberland Island, we got maybe a little too close to feral horses. They wanted even less to do with us than the gators. By the end of our trip, we were all swamp-wise, having learned about management practices and local threats, seeing hundreds of alligators, and launching off numerous rope swings. When I got back from Georgia, Maine was still feeling wintry, but things started sprouting and warming up eventually. With the snow and ice melting, rivers opened up once more, and I began learning to paddle whitewater. They got my adrenaline pumping, and I decided I wanted more. Soon enough, I began a source-to-sea paddle of the west branch of the Union River. I started northeast of Bangor on Great Pond, which is pictured. Over 3.5 days, I lined, portaged, or paddled through Swiftwater, Rapids, and around 14-foot Mariahville Falls, pictured on the right. After 40 miles of paddling the river and its two lakes, I took out at Ellsworth Harbor. I had loads of fun navigating these different waters, but I ultimately decided not to run most of the larger stuff. I didn't risk pushing my limits, winding up in a situation I couldn't get myself out of. No swamping for me. One of my favorite parts of the trip was the dam in Ellsworth. A friendly worker helped drive my canoe down in his truck, saving me from my last portage. And as I began canoeing again, I couldn't put my paddle in the water without touching a fish. The alewives had started running, a sign that spring was in full swing and summer was coming. It was a short distance to the harbor in Ellsworth, where my friend picked me up, and an odd feeling came over me. I was done. There would be no more of these adventures during my time at COA. All I had to do was write. With so much time to reflect during my trips, I eventually began reflecting on the academic year and beyond. My trips themselves, and certainly coming to COA in the first place, have taught me in ways I never expected. I've yet to prove the world-changing part of our motto, and my aspirations aren't necessarily that high, but I can speak from experience when I say this place is life-changing. As someone who didn't think they would attend college at all, I'm glad I came. I'm also excited about what comes next. In September, I'll begin a fellowship at Gould Academy in Western Maine, which will help me pursue a master's degree while co-teaching and working with the school's outing club. I look forward to exploring and learning from yet another part of Maine. On the left is the Mahoosic Range, as seen from the Gould campus, and on the right is a nearby hike. Finally, I'd like to thank my project directors, Catherine Turok and Nick Janae, for helping guide me through this project, my friends for their shuttle services and allowing me to winter camp in their backyard. I'll get the fire what I left one day, I swear. And my family for their encouragement and questioning whether what I was doing was safe. It was, mostly. I'll take questions now.
So, you think Maine is home?
Yes. Maine is home.
Was it important to do this solo? Talk to us about your rationale.
Sure. Yeah. So was it important to do this solo? Yes. Largely, like I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, because I only had to rely on myself. COA, the community here is notoriously unreliable sometimes in terms of scheduling and planning. So I really wanted to be able to just support myself and make it happen by myself. And it was also sort of a way to, yeah, sort of push my limits and expand what I'm comfortable with. Yeah. Thank you.
Nice work, Adrian. Alejandra Morales Torres was born and raised in Reynosa, a Mexican city at the Mexico-US border. She speaks fluent Spanish and English and has extended immersion in Mandarin, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. Ale is a Davis Scholar. Since 2020, she's been interested in linguistic justice and diversity and has been developing projects to address this in the COA Writing Center. She is one of the 2 winners of the 2023 Bread and Butter Tutors Excellence Awards. Ale is currently working on becoming the first COA student to get an education studies endorsement for sexuality education. Welcome, Ale.
Thank you, Kaya. Hello, everyone. Hola. I'm Ale, it's short for Alejandra, and I've been a writing tutor since my very first day in COA. But I often felt out of place being one of the few tutors whose first language was not English. And although I took methods of teaching writing across the curriculum, and I shadow experienced tutors throughout my training, I didn't feel like I was well prepared to work with linguistically diverse students without perpetuating racism. I was erasing students' voices because they were not writing in the same way a white, upper, middle-class American English writer would write the same paper, and that was the standard I had to compare them to. But don't get me wrong, as Asao Inoue has explained, there is nothing inherently wrong with the dominant white middle-class English. What's racist is using it to judge others, to punish or withhold opportunities and privileges. This realization, along with my own career interest in education, led me to take many education courses in COA and learn about other types of discrimination that permeates education. Among those, ableism stood out to me because as tutors, we work closely with individuals with a wide range of identities and backgrounds, including students with visible and/or invisible disabilities, from physical disabilities to neurodivergence like autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. And I lacked training and knowledge on how to personalize my tutoring practices to best serve these students. Practices that could apply to really any student, because as I learned from Kelly Sanborn, accommodations are just good teaching. So after many course projects, conversations about language justice, as well as reading dozens and dozens of works on writing-centered literature and pedagogy, I designed towards inclusive writing tutoring at COA. My senior project is a detailed curriculum plan for a COA course that comprehensively trains writing tutors by teaching about inclusive tutoring practices and using gender theory or rhetorical awareness as an anti-racist approach to tutoring writing. My design meets the standards and requirements to obtain the Level 1 of the International Tutor Training Program certification from the College Reading and Learning Association. The certification not only ensures compliance with the best practices for tutorial services in higher education, but also strengthens tutors' resume in the form of internationally recognized certificates for completing the training. The curriculum has 3 main units: the basis of tutoring, tutoring students with diverse backgrounds and identities, and the basis of writing tutoring. The more than 100 pages include detailed plans for lessons, assignments, assessments, writing skills workshops, and an experiential learning component. Through this training, tutors will gain basic understanding of writing-centered literature and inclusive tutoring pedagogy as influenced through an anti-discrimination approach through the Universal Design for Learning framework and translingualism. This course is also designed with these frameworks in mind, recognizing that tutors are not only serving diverse students, tutors themselves have diverse identities. So I prioritize accessibility, trying to decrease access fatigue, by, for example, making sure that reading materials can be read through text-to-speech softwares, providing transcripts or captioning for all videos, films, and podcasts used, and offering a variety of modalities to engage with the course content. As a neurodivergent college student myself, I wanted to ensure that this training was accessible to my neurodivergent and disabled peers who want to be tutors. This way, an inaccessible training is no longer a barrier to develop their potential to be great writing tutors. Throughout the years as a tutor, I found my diverse identities, particularly being multilingual, to be strengths that allowed me to work with students of diverse backgrounds and identities. By reading and discussing some of the most relevant anti-racist scholars within writing and composition studies, and lots of self-reflection through journaling, writing tutors will also be able to recognize diversity as a resource, both within themselves, but also the tutors they tutor. I mean, the students they tutor, sorry. This training curriculum is my gift to the college, the Writing Center, its director Blake Cass, and my peer writing tutors. But for a comprehensive and inclusive training like this one to be successful, there needs to be institutional and cultural change around the writing program in COA beyond the walls of the Writing Center. So, anti-racist scholar Frankie Condon really encapsulated what I mean by this in this quote. When we say to a student writer, for example, you really have to write things in this way because I'm not a racist and I like your home language and I think it's fabulous, but the teacher down the hall is a racist, then we're acting as functionaries for the racists down the hall, right? A much needed institutional change can happen now that Soyin Kaur will be joining COA as the new writing program director. So I encourage everyone to support the transformation of the writing program in COA into one in which students of all backgrounds and identities feel welcomed and all types of discrimination are actively worked against. As what's next for me, this summer I will implement my Projects for Peace, a 6-week mental health course for migrant children in my hometown. After that, I will use my education skills and knowledge to become a sexuality community educator and help provide equitable access to comprehensive sexuality education. And before I finish, I want to say thank you to my project directors, Bonnie Tai and Blake Cass, as well as everyone else listed on this slide, like mi familia and my friends and my housemates, for all the support, encouragement, and feedback, and also taking care of Tita, my dog, every now and then. That had given me enough energy and strength throughout this project and my time at COA. Muchas gracias. I welcome any questions now. Yes.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much today listening to all the students. It had never occurred to me that something as presumably intentionally good tutoring students could in fact actually be a forum for racism. So thank you for opening my eyes to that. As I was listening to you, it started to make me think not only just about the curriculum that you might deliver to make a more inclusive system, but I started thinking about, well, how do the students get to the need for tutoring? Is it self-diagnosed? I, as a student, want to be writing in a different way, or is it imposed from above? Teachers and faculty who are saying this student needs this. So I'm curious how students get to the Writing Center and the need for tutoring at COA, and how you might change that if you think there might be better ways to do that.
Yeah, the question is like how students get to the Writing Center to work with tutors and whether that has been imposed to them or if it has been like something that they initiated themselves. And I think historically, not only in our Writing Center, but like in the history of writing centers in the US, a lot of the times students end up getting tutoring because they are told to go fix something. They are told that there's something that they're lacking, that they're deficient, and then they need to go have someone help them fix that so that they can conform to these standards that they're not meeting. And I think that historically, that has probably been the case for most of the students that come to the Writing Center in COA. Luckily, the kind of like culture, and we've been trying to change that in this past like couple of years, trying to be like, come talk to us about your writing. Be exciting about writing. We're trying to create that cultural change. And I think part of that's why I say that it's very important to have like change beyond the walls of the Writing Center, so like not only tutors, but also like so that faculty are not treating the writing center as a remedial place, as somewhere like, oh, I don't want to deal with your commas, your punctuation, your grammar. Go to the writing center, get it fixed there, and then come back to me, kind of thing. So like, if that changes, then we're able to like really be more inclusive and like try not to punish people for whatever standards that have been set historically by white supremacy that they're not meeting. So, yeah. Any other question? Yes? Has my own writing changed through this process? Yes. And if you guys read the human ecology essay collections, you might see that my essay starts completely in English, because I'm talking about how my definition of human ecology has changed throughout time. And then it slowly starts merging into Spanglish, slowly. Spanish trickles here and there, until it fully ends in like paragraphs of Spanish. And I think that's kind of like representative of how I've been feeling my journey through my writing. It's like I'm trying to reclaim my home language and trying to use it, because I've been studying and getting education in the English language for so long, like for almost 7 years now, that I feel like I have this distance. So I'm trying to reclaim that. So I definitely put in more Spanglish and Spanish words here and there in my writing now. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ale. That brings us to the end of our presentations today. I want to say another huge thank you and another round of applause for all 10 of our senior presenters. Woo! And I also want to thank faculty members Jody Baker and Helen Hess for coordinating this event. You know, it's days like today that make me really excited to be a part of this community. Thank you all for letting us into your incredible worlds today. I'm grateful to be reminded that this community is full of this kind of good work that's challenging, creative, rewarding, and risky. So next, I'm going to invite our provost, Ken Hill, up to the podium to confer degrees.
I wonder first if we could have a round of applause for our wonderful moderator today. So you all got to see so much of the wonderful work that our students have done. What you don't know, in a self-directed curriculum, there's a lot of steps that they have to take before they get that degree in their hand. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of signatures, a lot of writing in and outside the classroom. They are 3 sentences away and a trustee endorsement from actually getting their degrees. I'm going to read these 3 sentences, then I'm going to have our chair. All the trustees will stand up and then endorse the degrees. And in the future, maybe I can have Ali help me with the clunky language of these 3 sentences, but I'm going to read them as they are written. To the trustees, I am honored to present to you the names of the candidates for graduation from College of the Atlantic. As the provost of the college, I hereby certify that these 81 candidates have met all the requirements for the Bachelor of Arts degree in Human Ecology. Therefore, I heartily recommend that they be granted from the college all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of graduation status. Thank you. That saves me all the worry of having all these diplomas printed out that we now get to give to you. I believe that officially concludes our program today. Do you have any more words? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.